It's 1922. A British Indian archaeologist named R.D. Banerji is standing on a dust-covered mound expecting to find Buddhist ruins worth maybe $50,000 in today's museum valuations. Instead, he discovers something that will cost your understanding of ancient wealth and urban planning everything. Beneath his feet, a city so perfectly organized, so methodically planned, that archaeologists still can't figure out one crucial detail out in a grid. Bricks cut to a single uniform size across the entire settlement. And running beneath every block, a drainage system so precisely engineered that it wouldn't look out of place in a 19th century European capital. The city is 5,000 years old. And nobody, not Banerji, not the teams who followed him, not the researchers still working the site today, can fully explain what it was, who built it, or what happened to the people who lived there. Mohenjo-daro sits in the Indus Valley, in the Sindh province of modern Pakistan. At its peak, somewhere around 2500 BCE, it was home to as many as 40,000 people. That makes it one of the largest urban settlements on Earth at the time, comparable in scale to ancient Ur in Mesopotamia, to early Memphis in Egypt. But here's where Mohenjo-daro starts to separate itself from those other ancient cities. In Mesopotamia, you find royal tombs, elaborate burial chambers stacked with gold, bodies of servants sacrificed to serve their masters in death. In Egypt, the entire landscape is dominated by monuments to the power of kings. The pyramids, the temples, the colossal statues. At Mohenjo-daro, there is almost none of that. No palace has ever been identified with certainty. No royal tomb. No monument to a single ruler. No image of a king in triumph, no inscription naming a conqueror. What they did build, and built extraordinarily well, were granaries, public baths, and drains. In the records I've kept, few ancient sites force a re-examination of what civilization actually means the way Mohenjo-daro does. The assumption built into most history textbooks is that complexity requires hierarchy, that cities need kings, that order requires force. Mohenjo-daro seems to suggest otherwise. And that alone should make it far more famous than it is. The Great Bath is perhaps the most remarkable single structure on the site. It's a watertight tank, approximately 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and nearly 3 meters deep, sealed with a layer of natural tar to prevent leakage. It predates the Roman baths by roughly 2,000 years. Surrounding it are changing rooms. Beside it, what appears to be a large assembly hall. Nobody knows what rituals were performed here. Nobody knows which priests, if any, presided over them. The Indus Valley script, the writing system used by the people of Mohenjo-daro, has never been deciphered. That's the next layer of the mystery, and it matters more than most people realize. Over 4,000 short inscriptions have been found on small carved seals, square tablets, usually made of steatite, depicting animals, geometric patterns, and symbols. The seals were likely used in trade, pressed into clay to mark ownership or origin. But the script itself remains locked. Every attempt to decode it has either stalled or collapsed under academic scrutiny. Without the written language, we cannot read their laws. We cannot read their prayers. We don't know what they called themselves, what they called their city, or what they believed happened after death. But the strangest part, the detail that shifts the entire picture, hadn't been found yet when Banerji first stood on that mound. In the upper levels of the city, excavators began uncovering skeletons. Not buried in tombs. Not arranged in graves. Scattered in the streets, in houses, in a public well. Some were found in postures suggesting they had fallen where they stood. Some, in the most haunting discovery of all, were found close together, as if they had been holding on to one another in their final moments. 37 skeletons were found in the uppermost strata of the site. Forensic analysis found evidence of violence on some of the skulls. Others showed no obvious trauma at all. This is where the official story starts to fracture. 3 records, 3 separate lines of evidence, contradict the most comfortable explanation for Mohenjo-daro's end. and the third was quietly set aside for decades before anyone examined it in full. The first is this: there are no defensive walls around Mohenjo-daro. For a city of 40,000 people, that absence is extraordinary. Every other major ancient city we know of, Jericho, Uruk, Troy, was fortified. Mohenjo-daro was not. Which means either the people who built it didn't fear outside attack, or they had no time to respond when one came. The second is the distribution of the bodies. If the city fell to an invasion, Aryan migration, as early theorists proposed, you'd expect the bodies to concentrate near the perimeter, near breached gates, near points of entry. Instead, they are scattered through the interior, clustered near the final refuge points of the city center. That pattern doesn't fit a military assault. The third piece of evidence is the one that was set aside. And it's the one that's hardest to dismiss. In the 1970s, a researcher named David Davenport made a claim that the archaeological establishment largely declined to engage with directly. He reported that certain sections of Mohenjo-daro's ruins showed evidence of extreme localized heat, fused pottery, crystallized stone, materials that seemed to have been exposed to temperatures far beyond what a city fire could produce. He proposed something catastrophic. Something sudden. What I found in the archives is not confirmation of his more dramatic conclusions, but the physical anomalies he identified were real enough that they were quietly re-examined by later researchers. Fused black stone. Pottery shards vitrified in ways that cooking fires couldn't account for. The mainstream position is that these may result from a brick kill or a concentrated burning event during the city's decline. But no one has proven that conclusively. The debate hasn't closed. It's simply grown quieter. And here is what we do know: stripped of speculation, Mohenjo-daro was abandoned sometime around 1900 BCE. The decline appears to have been gradual in some districts, buildings subdivided, construction quality declining, the careful civic order beginning to fray. But in other areas, the evidence suggests something much more abrupt. The leading modern explanation points to environmental collapse, a shift in the monsoon patterns, the drying of the Gagahakra river system, a slow suffocation of the agricultural base that fed the city. Climate, not conquest. It's a reasonable theory. It fits much of the evidence. But it doesn't explain the skeletons in the street. It doesn't explain why a civilization that built the most sophisticated urban drainage system of the ancient world left no monument, no inscription, no farewell. And it doesn't explain why the script they used, the only written record they left behind, remains completely unread 5,000 years later. Few civilizations have vanished so completely while leaving so much physical evidence behind. The Indus Valley people built in brick rather than stone, which means much of what they made has eroded. But what survives is precise, considered, and deeply human. The standardized weights found at Mohenjo-daro suggest a society concerned with fairness in trade. The public water infrastructure suggests a society that understood collective health. The absence of monumental war imagery suggests, though it cannot prove, a society that didn't organize itself around violence. And then they were gone. The cities emptied. The script stopped appearing. The trade networks dissolved. Whatever came after, and populations clearly did survive, dispersing east and south, it wasn't Mohenjo-daro. It wasn't that. What remains is the city itself, half excavated, slowly eroding under the effects of salt and rising groundwater. UNESCO has listed it as endangered. The same earth that preserved it for 5 millennia is now, with changing water tables, beginning to dissolve it. The skeletons have been removed. The seals are in museums. The script is still unread. Somewhere in those 4,000 inscriptions may be the answer, the name they gave themselves, the account of what they saw coming, the record of a civilization's last days written in a language no living person can yet understand. Until someone unlocks it, Mohenjo-daro keeps its silence. The archivist will be watching for when that changes. If any part of this unsettled you, the unburied dead, the undeciphered script, or the city that simply stopped, leave your theory in the comments. The most compelling answer in the archive wins the next investigation.